Hello everyone, welcome to the 180 Jury Charge and Literary. We're going to start off with a paragraph that covers legal terms. Ready? Homicide is the killing of a human being. Justifiable homicide is the killing in self-defense. Murder is the unlawful killing of a person with malice aforethought. Murder in the first degree, or murder one, is a willful, deliberate, or premeditated killing. Manslaughter is the killing of another without malice aforethought. There are two classes of manslaughter, voluntary and involuntary. The outcome of a criminal trial may be a conviction. At the close of a criminal trial, the convicted individual may be sentenced to imprisonment. The prisoner may be eligible for a parole, a reprieve, or a pardon. Okay, so I've got an article here on the planets. Ready? The Earth and the other planets move in orbit around the Sun. Because the planets are so close, they can be seen easily. They appear to wander back and forth from east to west and from west to east. When a planet is to the east of the Sun, it sets in the evening just after the sunset. When it travels to the west of the Sun, we can see it in the morning just prior to sunrise. Those planets that are nearest to the Sun have the smallest orbit. They include Mercury and Venus. Venus is the brightest of the planets. Mars, nicknamed the Red Planet, is closest to the Earth and is inhabited by a low order of plant life. Jupiter and Saturn are very large, with atmospheres composed of gases which are poisonous to man. Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto are farthest away from the Earth, and very little is known about their composition. In recent years, space exploration has enabled man to discover and learn more about the composition, atmosphere, and forms of life of their closest celestial neighbors. Okay. I've got some closing arguments from plaintiff's counsel. Okay, here we go. Now, on the direct examination of Mr. Meso, we went into a lengthy questioning session. We took him all the way back to the past 20 years of his employment. We showed how he started out as an apprentice electrician. Then, before that, laborer. How he was in the service, how he did heavy labor and skilled type labor, which required him to use his arms above his head. We did that, ladies and gentlemen, for a purpose, not only to show what I consider to be a very credible history of a fine gentleman in the true American tradition, but we did that, ladies and gentlemen, for the purpose of showing that Mr. Meso was working with that arm and doing heavy work, pain-free, without any limitations, putting in many, many hours of overtime work. Ladies and gentlemen, there is not one iota of evidence that Mr. Meso had pain in that shoulder or in the neck before the injury in this case. So we suggest, in accordance with my comments a little earlier about what to do when there is a contradiction, we suggest that when a physician renders an opinion but gives no basis, in fact, for that opinion, and furthermore, where there is no basis in the record for that opinion, that opinion does not deserve recognition. Dr. Connor, in this regard again, he was called as an expert at the last moment. The plaintiff was claiming an injury to the cervical spine. In the cervical spine, let's face it, what is bothering this gentleman are not x-ray findings. Yes, there were x-ray findings on the shoulder. He got along very well with that arm through the years. It is the pain that has resulted from the injury of this case. It is the pain that keeps him up at night, that causes him to go into traction, that limits him in his physical activities at home and on the job. Pain in the neck radiating outward, numbness in the hand. So when this gentleman is sent to an expert for the purpose of giving an opinion and analysis of what extent he was injured in that accident, and what extent of claims of neck injury and neck pain are valid, naturally you would expect a physician to give an opinion about his neck pain. Dr. Connor testified that he was not giving any opinion about Mr. Meso's neck pain. He did not have any opinion. The test that Dr. Connor took is entirely consistent. That was an objective test that was done by way of needles, and I am not going to go through the manner that the test was done. We all heard the comments about it a few times in this trial. But the point is that Mr. Meso not only demonstrated atrophy of the shoulder girdle muscle on a visual inspection, but in addition, the test that Dr. Connor took was positive. Dr. Connor testified that there was severe nerve damage. On cross-examination, he located the location of the nerves that were damaged. Where? Do you recall his answer? He said at C5. C5, ladies and gentlemen. C5, of course, refers to the cervical spine, a nerve root in the cervical spine. So, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that the medical testimony that you heard does establish the burden that Mr. Meso had to meet with reference to what took place anatomically at the time of the accident, extent of his injuries, the need for treatment, his disability from work, his need for future treatments, and ongoing disability. Now, at this time, I would like to undertake a discussion of the value of the damages Mr. Meso suffered. Okay, I've got an article for you, and this is called Don't Let My Baby Die. James Partridge can explain what happened that morning, maybe no human can. Ready? Early last June, Sean Kroll, 2.5, edged quietly into the bathroom where his mother was busy drying her hair. Pointing toward the kitchen, he mumbled, "Jennifer in the water. She has probably squirted water on the floor from the drinking water dispenser again," thought Tammy Kroll, annoyed by the possibility of another mopping up. Hurrying into the kitchen, she noticed the back door was open. 1-year-old Jennifer was nowhere in sight. What's going on, she wondered. Sean had never unlocked a door before. Panic began to grip her as she ran out onto the deck leading to an above-ground pool. No Jennifer anywhere. My God, the pool, Tammy thought. The water was only 4 feet deep, but it was dirty from the long winter, and she could see nothing below the murky surface. Without thinking, Tammy plunged into the ice-cold water. To her horror, a tiny body in a red dress floated up. It was Jennifer. Tammy grabbed the lifeless form and clambered out of the pool. She felt for Jennifer's pulse. None. She checked for breathing. None. Jennifer's fingers and lips were blue. Her arms flopped like a rag doll's. "Jennifer," she cried. With the limp child in her arms, Tammy ran to the kitchen, picked up her cell phone, and punched 911 for the operator. The phone rang and rang. Come on, she pleaded. Then more ringing. Finally, a crisp, recorded voice came on the line. "Due to a high volume of calls, we are unable to handle your call immediately." Tammy threw her phone down. CPR, she thought, laying Jennifer out on the kitchen deck. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Got to get oxygen into her. From her high school CPR instructor, Tammy knew every second counted. She clamped her mouth over her daughter's tiny nose and blew. Blow, pause, blow, pause. Then lifting her head, Tammy screamed for help. On the street behind the Krolls' suburban Chicago house, James Partridge, a blonde-bearded 38-year-old, drew a deep breath in the brisk morning air. It was good to be alive. He was always thankful for that. 20 years before, in the Gulf War, both of his legs had been blown off just above the knee. He was also left blind in one eye and nearly blind in the other. Reaching for a garbage bag to haul out to the street on the footrest of his wheelchair, James heard a faint scream. He squinted toward the distant sound, then dropped the bag and raced his wheelchair down the driveway. He wheeled across the road and onto the bumpy surface of an open lot. There he paused and listened. This time, the woman's cry, almost a death wail, seemed closer. It went through him like a current, just like the screams on that day in the war, March 31st, 1991. James was point man as his Marine platoon headed across a field. Suddenly, a booby trap exploded, mortally wounding the men just behind him. The force sent him flying into the air. Somewhere close by, a buddy was screaming, "Don't let me die." Legless and legally blind, James Partridge now lived on his full disability support from the Veterans Administration. 2 sons from his first marriage resided nearby with their mother. In 2001, he had married Sue Fowler and adopted her young son. James spent most of his time working at occasional odd jobs and playing with his boys. "James, James," it was Sue calling from behind. Her voice was getting closer. He didn't pause to look back. James pushed harder at the wheels. Small rocks and sticks slowed him down. Despite the morning chill, sweat streamed down his forehead and his chest. "Where are you?" he yelled to the woman's voice ahead. "Tell me where you are." The screaming stopped. "Over here, this way," she said. Now Sue was behind him. "Can you see anything?" James asked her. "No, there's a hedge up ahead. Small trees, so you can't see through them." Sue was terrified. The screams were garbled, but Sue knew nothing would stop James. There was little he couldn't or wouldn't do when he put his mind to it. Fix the car, mow the lawn, wrestle his sons to the floor. He had covered the 80 yards across the lot in only minutes. James had learned determination early. Growing up on a farm near Clay City in southern Illinois, he was the youngest of 6 children who worked hard for everything they had. In high school, James decided to be a Marine, and that was it. He graduated on a Friday in May 1985 and was in boot camp in San Diego the following Monday. As another scream tore the air, James rolled out of his wheelchair onto the ground, squirmed through 4 feet of tangled brush, and hoisted himself onto his hands. Then, swinging his body through his arms, he raced forward on his hands toward the house. "I've got to get there quick," he thought, taking longer, faster strides with each arm. It was 75 feet from the brush to the Kroll's house. Sue bounded up the 8 wooden steps from the lawn to the kitchen deck. Pushing with his stumps and heaving with his hands, James scrambled up the steps. "Don't let my baby die," Tammy screamed. Die of what? James wondered. What's going on? Looking up, Tammy saw a woman running toward her across the deck. "Call an ambulance," she said. To Sue, the child looked dead. She was blue all over. Her eyes were rolled back. Sue felt sick. James said again, "Call 911. His voice was calm as he came sliding across the deck. He moved to Tammy's side so quickly that she didn't notice he had no legs. James felt for a pulse in the baby's neck. There was none. He touched her skin. It held an icy chill that he had learned to recognize on the battlefield, the cold touch of death. How long has she been dead, he thought. He realized that even if she were revived, every second without oxygen increased the chances of brain damage. Fight for life. As he squinted close up, James could now see that Tammy was doing the CPR wrong. 10 years before, he had taken a CPR course. It was only a way of passing time. After all, how often would a legless man have to save someone's life? James remembered the first rule of resuscitation: open the airways. James took the child from Tammy and, tilting her head back, checked for breathing. Finding none, he attempted unsuccessfully to breathe air into her. To clear the blocked air passages, he gently pressed her stomach. Water spouted from the baby's mouth and nose. He placed the child on her back and began the rhythmic breathe-press technique of CPR. Between breaths, James talked softly to Jennifer, urging the child back to life. Then, far off, he heard sirens, but only because he had been listening for them and had inwardly been praying for them. Now he knew help was coming, at last. Breathe, push count, breathe, push count. As the sirens grew louder, James suddenly felt a slight quiver, a gasp for air. "She's trying to breathe," he told Tammy. "I've got a heartbeat." The beats, however, were irregular and faint, so James continued the CPR, ignoring everything but the wispy flutter of life in his hands. Then suddenly he was aware of people rushing up and kneeling beside him and the baby. The first to arrive were Captain William Enders and firefighter Peter Daly, emergency medical technicians with the Winfield Fire Protection District. They sectioned the baby's air passages and held a mask attached to an oxygen bottle over her tiny face. Jennifer was breathing. Shortly, paramedics Michael Turner and Kelly Kindlin of the Leonard Ambulance Service came running onto the deck. They checked the baby's pulse. It was only 50 beats a minute compared with an infant's normal rate of 100. When Turner tried to insert an intravenous tube, Jennifer cried out. James felt the tension break. "She's okay. She's going to make it," Sue said to him quietly. After the ambulance left, James slowly slid himself over to the steps and eased down them one at a time. Then, hoisting himself once more onto his hands, he swung his tired body into his wheelchair. Minutes later, he was back in his garage, loading garbage bags. It promised to be a good day. At the Central Hospital, Jennifer made a rapid recovery. The cold pool water had protected her from brain damage. James Patterson's CPR had done the rest. A great presence. After Tammy Kroll and her husband Michael told the story of how their neighbor had saved Jennifer's life, newspapers and television stations all over the country turned James into a national hero. Phone calls poured into his home from well-wishers. Many were from fellow veterans who took understandable pride in what he had done. One call came from organizers of a veterans march scheduled for Flag Day celebrations. They wanted James to serve as an honorary marshal of the parade and to lead the march through the streets of Chicago. A private man, James tends to shun organizations, but he agreed to join the march because he said he still believes in the cause for which he lost his legs and most of his sight in the war. But he turned down many other honors, gifts, and requests for appearances. He wanted to get back to the quiet life he had enjoyed before. 2 days after Jennifer's near drowning, a grateful Michael and Tammy Kroll stopped by James Partridge's house. The couple were bringing Jennifer home. Gently, Michael placed Jennifer in James's arms. He cradled her close, talking softly to her. Something happened that morning of the rescue that James still has trouble explaining. "Let me put it this way," he says. "When a human being dies, and Jennifer was dead, a mortal man like myself can do nothing. Even though he does not consider himself a religious man, James feels he was an instrument for a greater presence. All the Krolls know is that they had lost their infant daughter that morning, and James Partridge was there to bring her back to life. For them, that is explanation enough." Great article, huh? Okay, I'm going to read you another paragraph on legal terms. Ready? Negligence is a failure to follow a standard of reasonable care or observation for the protection of the interest and rights of another person. Criminal negligence means an intentional disregard for the welfare of others. Criminal negligence, or negligence, which is caused by both the plaintiff and the defendant, is called contributory negligence. Some states no longer recognize contributory negligence. A trespasser is one who unlawfully enters or intrudes on another's property. An invitee is one who enters property at the expressed consent of the owner. The nature of the business which brings a person onto the property determines whether a person is a licensee or an invitee. Okay. I've got one more article on the continuation of metals. Okay, here we go. The most useful and important substances in the Earth's crust are the metals. People have used them for centuries to produce weapons, tools, and utensils. All the metals are solid at ordinary temperatures except, of course, mercury. Most of the metals have certain distinguishing properties, which include a definite crystal structure, a low melting point, and the ability to conduct heat and electricity. Gold was probably discovered on Earth before any other metal. Normally found near the Earth's surface, gold is one of the heaviest metals, with a specific gravity of 19.3. Gold is too soft to be used in its pure form, so it is often alloyed with silver, copper, and platinum. The best gold jewelry contains 600 to 800 parts of gold per thousand. Gold has a low melting point of 1063 degrees centigrade and a boiling point of 2600 degrees centigrade. Hot gold vapor is a deep color of purple. Okay, and that concludes our literary and jury charge for the 180 class. Have a great day.